Welcome again to Flame of Truth. I'm going to start a new series today that in my church I called Everyday Messiah. Looking at different stories from the life of Jesus and seeing what we can do about a Messiah that lives in everyday experience. One of the great controversial questions that I think we all have to wrestle with is, why isn't there more change? You know, we want to know if Jesus is supposed to be so powerful, then why aren't Christians more different? If you do the research, we find out that sometimes the numbers of Christians who sin are about the same as the rest of the world. It shouldn't make a difference if Christ is truly an everyday Messiah. You can tell easily that I was in my mid-20s and began to lose my hair. And my father and my grandfather and all my brothers and everybody we know. My father tried to wear a hairpiece one time. I was probably in high school maybe. So they told him he could wear it anywhere. He went down to the swimming pool, dove into the pool, and came up. Here was the hairpiece floating a few feet away. Well, that was the end of that. I had an experience one time. I wore a hairpiece for, 20 years, I guess, till I turned 50 years old. We were driving up the California Valley and stayed at my brother's house. We got into his house about midnight. We slept on the hide of bed in the living room. I took the hairpiece off, set it by the side of the bed. The next morning, my little nephew, who's an adult now, but back then was a little kid, he came over to me, and the dog had somehow got a hold of the hair and had the hairpiece in his mouth. And the little boy saw the hair that used to be on my head and now was in the dog's mouth. And he said to me, "Uncle Danny, did it hurt?" Thought the dog had scalped me. So, we have crazy things with hair. One of my church members, well, many times people have given me different bottles or jars or told me to call this one or that one, get something I could rub on my head and hair would grow. I was in Chicago. One of my members came up to me and said, "Pastor Dan, I've got something for you." I think it was some Amway product. And he said, you rub it on your head and it'll grow hair. I looked at him, as bald as me. And I said, "When it works for you, let me know. If it's really going to work, it ought to change people." I told my church the other day that I can pass by a lot of things. It's hard for me to pass by cookies. If I see a plate of cookies, I go to a lot of receptions and weddings and funeral dinners and all kinds of parties. It's part of being a pastor. There's always cookies. It doesn't matter. I can hardly walk by one of those and not take a cookie. I'm addicted. My wife made some cookies for the neighbors next door. We forgot to take them right away. I was busy and night free. I would take one, and pretty soon all the cookies for the neighbors were gone. I don't know if we ever got any cookies for the neighbors. Can we really change? And how much change can we do? In our particular church tradition, there's something called an 1888 message, a couple famous missionaries from Africa. And I read an article one time where they talked about why they had written up this 1888 message about what Jesus could do in your life. They were missionaries at one of our colleges in Africa, a place that I've been to, and they tried to help several times. Wonderful place. This is 50 years ago, 60 almost. But they had trouble. There was no television. There were no lights at night, no electricity. And so somehow the faculty had no other source of entertainment and pleasure. And there was a lot of sleeping around, people going to the wrong house. And these missionaries preached. They preached Jesus in grace. They preached how Jesus can give you victory. But they just couldn't seem to break it until they finally began. They thought they had an answer in what they now call the 1888 message. Christ had nature just like ours, and he was victorious, so therefore we can be victorious. That's the bottom line. What is it going to take to change people, to be like Jesus? Chuck Swindoll came out with a new book recently where he said, "So you want to be like Christ?" Because he looked around and he said, Christians who say they are followers of Christ are not like Christ. Why aren't we more like Christ? Do we want to be like Christ? Romans chapter 6, verses 68 says, "Our old sinful selves were crucified with Christ so that sin might lose its power in our lives. We are not supposed to be slaves any longer to sin." A couple of my members told me they were going up to Las Vegas for some special seminar. This was several years ago. I think it was called Rapport. $2,000 for one weekend. And if you would just go to this weekend and put this money, they're practically guaranteed that it would turn your life around. And your marriage would be better, you'd be better at work, you would begin to fulfill your dreams, you would begin to get in shape. It would just somehow unstick whatever obstacles were keeping you from being all that you were made to be. And I said, they wanted to know if I'd like to go. And I said, fine, but I have trouble with anything that says it will do it. That's supposed to be Christ. Is it possible that some secular weekend will give you the answers that Christ has not been able to give you and change your life? So you want to be like Christ. I read a story the other day. A man came back from being in the Vietnam War. He was flying B-52s in Vietnam. Ray Baker finally came home, and his family was so excited they took him out to eat in a Mexican restaurant. Evidently, when he was in the Air Force at the Vietnam War, they trained him down to a razor's edge, is that the moment they heard a buzzer, that was the moment to get out of bed and run out and get on your plane, because time to go. And so they were eating in this Mexican restaurant. All of a sudden, he bolted out of the table, went running out to the parking lot. Whole family went running out and said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" He had heard a buzzer go off in the kitchen when they wanted the waiter to come back and get the food for the people. And when he heard the buzzer, it just went off on him, a Pavlovian moment, and went running out, and he said, "Where's my plane? Where's my plane?" Why can't Christians be like that? Where it is just automatic. Christ is in your life. The Holy Spirit has filled everything in you, and you will live a godly life, and you will be like Christ. Why hasn't that happened to more of us? Well, let's wrestle with this story from John chapter 2. It's the story of Jesus changing the water to wine. Here we have everyday Messiah. Well, it's clear from this story, Jesus goes to weddings. It's a great story. Jesus goes to weddings. He's invited. They want him to come. Parties are better with Jesus. And if Jesus is telling us the truth about God, it says that God likes weddings. And it tells us that making love was God's idea. God is for weddings. God is for marriage. God is for making love. Pleasure is good. Sports is good. Looking good is good. Life and real life is good. It is okay to have pleasure in food and music and making love. God is a God of love and life and pleasure. And Jesus says every day, he wants us to live every day full of life now and today. We learn that right from the beginning of this passage. He's the everyday Messiah. Dallas Willard, who teaches down at USC, has a wonderful paragraph in one of his books where he says, one of Satan's great strategies, because he knows, is that if people really know God, they'll experience pleasure. Jesus says, "I came to give you life more abundantly." And so Satan's attack to try to undercut that connection with Jesus is to try to find a way in the church to make so many rules and so many laws that people are not free now to experience pleasure, legitimate pleasure, good pleasure. And he takes something away from one of God's weapons. One of God's gifts is to say, "I want to give you a party. I want to make life good for you." And so it's gone. We can't let it happen. Don't let it happen to you. Number 2 is the cross. We can't just look at the story of Jesus and the changing the water to wine at the surface level. There's many layers. And let's look at one of these layers. Everywhere in the first few chapters of John, we have the idea that whatever Jesus is talking about is better than without Jesus. Jesus is better than everything. And so in this particular story, the next passage is cleansing the temple. And he is obviously trying to say, in 3 of the Gospels, the cleansing of the temple is at the end of his life. Here in John's at the beginning of his life. What is John trying to say? Is that someone greater than the temple, as great as the Solomon and the great temples of the Old Testament, as great as those temples were, something even greater was here. Those temples got destroyed, had to be rebuilt. This temple was going to be destroyed. And Jesus says in John 2:19, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it up again in 3 days." He is the temple. Don't get your life tied to that particular temple when something better is here. Everything is better than with Jesus. That wasn't the real thing. Christ is the real thing. And then you look here in chapter 2, verse 6, where it says is that there was water in these jars for ceremonial washing. They had 20 or 30 gallons. Why does he put this in about these jars were for ceremonial washing? because he is going to say, the ceremonies were good, but they've had their time. Ceremonies are not enough. You need Jesus. The ceremonies are to point to Jesus. Jesus is the real thing. You need Jesus to take the water from those ceremonies and make it the real thing. Don't let the ceremony somehow become the whole thing. You cannot have your religion be only rituals and going through the motions. You need a miracle of Jesus changing the water to wine. Don't be satisfied with the rituals and the ceremonies. Jesus is replacing the water of Judaism and all its rituals with the newness of Christ and the new kingdom. And it's the same with all the rest of these chapters in the first part of John. John chapter 3, we have Nicodemus, who is, highly educated. And Jesus says, you need to be born again. That was not enough. You can be educated, you can have a PhD, you can be economically high in the world of academics. I live on a pastor at a university campus. But Jesus says, I am even better than that. And then we go to the story of the woman at the well. I'm preaching on that in my church this week, where it says the woman was proud because Jacob was their father of all these people in that place. And Jesus, that doesn't matter here now. Jacob's father, I am the one that is here now. And then he says, with the water from this well, you'll be thirsty again. But you drink the water from me, you will never thirst again. Jesus is promising everything about Jesus is better. Jesus is better than everything you have, better than making love, better than education, better than making money, better than sexuality, better than anything that you can possibly experience in the world today. The greatest pleasures this world has, better than wine, better than it all. Do you believe that in your soul, in your DNA, that Jesus, you are finding that Jesus is better than everything else? Or are the times when you look longingly thinking it might be better out there somewhere in the world? No, Jesus is better. And Jesus is saying, this changes right now. This is not someday when you die, you will go to the kingdom, and that's when the wine will come. No, he is saying, the kingdom is here. I can change the water into wine right now in your life, and I will make it better, and I can do it. You can live your best life now, Joel Osteen says in his new book. And then we get to the cross. The cross is everywhere here in this book and in this story. Jesus says to Mary, my hour is not yet come, in John chapter 2. But in John chapter 12, not very long, it's clear. As we move into the cross portion of John, the hour has come. It is time for the cross. The wine in this story stands, of course, for the blood. There is no Last Supper in John. This is a part of the Last Supper. In John 2, we have the changing water to wine. In John 6, we have the feeding of the 5,000, the bread and the wine. That is the Last Supper. And Jesus is saying it is already here in my life and in my picture of God and in my teachings. The Last Supper has already come. The kingdom has come. It is here and now. It is already in the middle of your life. And so we go on. The wedding is on the third day, it says in John chapter 2. And of course, Jesus rises on the third day. There are only two places in all of the gospel where Jesus talks about his mother. One's at the wedding, one is at the cross. We're moving into the cross here. John 2 is setting the stage for the cross. And then we talk about glory. Glory is everywhere in John. John 17, I came to reveal, I've done glory, I brought glory to you. Give me your glory. And the glory is in the cross. Jesus came to bring glory, to give us the truth about God. Well, we have in John chapter 2, verse 11, when he changed the water to wine, that revealed his glory. His glory. Somehow, something about the wine, cross, glory. Glory. Now, then he quotes Isaiah. Wonderful new idea. In John chapter 2, he quotes this idea of glory. And then in John chapter 12, verse 43, it says, Isaiah saw his glory and spoke about him. And quotes from Isaiah 6, which is the story of the throne of God, high and lifted up. And also quotes from Isaiah 53, the cross, the throne and cross, glory. This is where the Jews have had so much trouble. They're waiting for the throne. But what about the cross? They want the throne and glory, but they miss the glory is in the cross. It is the two together. Jesus goes through the cross to get to the throne. It is His glory to die on the cross, and we hear the glory, the truth about God at the cross. And then we get to go to the throne. It's the same for you and me. We go through the cross to get to glory. Most of us want to skip the cross. We don't see any glory in the cross. But the Bible is clear. The wine was His glory. And the cross is His glory. It is the greatest picture of God in Jesus Christ. Here is what we believe. Jesus says, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. Here's what we believe, is that we respect all the other world religions, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, all the religions. There's truth in them all, and we can learn about them all. But we're Christians because we believe Jesus Christ is the glory. He is the best truth about God. And Jesus is the best picture of God, the best package of the truth about God. And of course, the cross is the best picture of God that Jesus gave, the best part of Jesus' life. The cross is the glory. That is the heart of what God is. We have this incredible gift of what God is all about. First time I preached this in my church, there had been a train wreck on the way down to Los Angeles. It took them hours to get one man unentangled from all of the wreckage. They had to use the jaws of life. And evidently, before he thought he was going to die, he had taken his own blood and written there, I love my kids. I love my wife, Leslie. He used his blood to express his love to his family. That is what Jesus did. The cross is His glory. The cross is the heart of the gospel. At the cross, we see the heart of God and the truth about His character. Satan has been telling lies about God for thousands of years. At the cross, we find that is the way God really is. We fear God's heart, and we feel the glory of God at the cross. That's where the cross is. Then we get to the throne. Well, now we have the story of the transformation. Very exciting. As I did the research for this, all kinds of parallels between Christ and Moses. We have to go quickly. If you haven't seen these before, let me read them to you. Both times they tried to kill Moses and Christ, kill all the babies, hoping they would kill this new person. Both came out of Egypt. Both fasted for 40 days. Both gave new laws from the top of a mountain, Mount Sinai and the Sermon on the Mount. Moses, to heal the people from the snakes, hung a snake up on the pole. Christ is hung up on a tree. And if you'll just look at that or look at Christ, you can be healed. And then someone went back and found a connection between the plagues and Christ's ministry. I'll read some of these to you also. Moses turned the water to blood. Christ turns the water into wine. Moses has all the animals die in the plagues. Christ brings human beings to life. Moses gave the Egyptians sores all over their body. Christ heals the paralytic. Some of these are, Moses did this, Christ did more. Others are by contrast. Moses sent hail, thunder, and lightning. Christ calms the storm. Locusts ate all the bread. Christ makes the bread and feeds it to the 5,000. Moses brought darkness. Christ heals the blind man and gives him light. He is the light of the world. Moses kills all of the firstborn sons. Christ brings Lazarus back to life. What's the point? Jesus is the new Moses. There's a new Exodus going on. And the gospel in John is saying, Moses is here. That was Moses, brought people out of slavery, out of Egypt, and now Christ is here. It's the new Exodus, the new Moses, and He can change your life. Whatever Moses was able to do, Christ can do more. Whatever slavery you're in today, Christ has the power to free you from any slavery, anything that is addicting you, anything that is causing you to not be all that you could be, that's getting in the way. Whether it's something in your family or holding on to gossip or grudges or any addictions, Christ can set you free and make it right for you and take you to the promised land today, not just in the future someday, but today. If He can change the water into wine, He can change anything in your life. I heard Barry Black, wonderful preacher, at our general conference session here a couple years ago. He said they were holding meetings and one man came in just drunk, kind of unruly, and then he would kind of sit in the back and sleep it off. And the deacons and the rest of the team wanted them to move him out. But the evangelist said, no, let him stay. They finally said, okay, let's let him stay. Every night he would come in kind of drunk and out of it. But by the end of the message, he began to come awake and began to hear the gospel and changed his life. He gave his life to Christ, was cleansed of all that, is an administrator for the church today. The power of transformation, the new Moses comes in and can change your life. Well, the question now is how much can be changed and how much is still possible. Number one, there is no more wine they came to Jesus. It starts there. When you find out that there is no more wine in your life, you thought you tried it out, you tried the parties of the world, but when you find out it's not working, there's not enough. There was a man who got drunk, and the friends offered to take him home. He said, only a little mile away, I can drive. He only went a few blocks, the police pulled him over. But while they were going to get him out to walk the line and to do the alcohol tests, something else happened. The radio blared out a robbery was going. They told him, you stay here, we'll stop, we'll go take care of that, and we'll come back and get you. Well, he waited a few minutes. Said, well, why should I stay here? Drove home, went into his house. He told his wife, anybody comes to the door, tell him I'm sick and I've been sick for days. Well, a few hours later, the police did come. He said to his wife, you know, we're looking for your husband. She said, well, he's been sick. He's been up in his bed for days. And they said, could we see his car? Went into the garage. Here was the police car with all the lights blazing. He was so drunk, he drove the police car home. And he admitted he had a problem. It starts there when you realize there's no more wine. You've tried the party world, you've tried the world's way, and it's just not reality. You accept where we are and that you need help. He had to go get help, went to AA the next day. You have to deal with reality. Number two, it says in John chapter 2, verse 5, Mary said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. There's power in the words of Jesus. Whatever Jesus say, if you're not finding more change in your life, let the words, read the words until the words become part of your soul and your DNA, and you will change because Christ's power has words. Do whatever he tells you, and he will change the water into wine. Number three, it says that wine is better than water. No one can change until they're absolutely convinced that what Jesus has to give you is better than what you already had. That Christ is an upgrade. Christ is better. Life is going to be better. There's better answers, better truth, better way to live. Christ wants to give you the best life. He didn't come to take life away, but to give you life. No one changes until they believe wine is better than water. Tiger Woods, right now he's injured, not able to play. Last big tournament was the U.S. Open. Broken leg, it turns out, and a damaged knee, and still won the U.S. Open. But a few years ago, he was already the best. Changed coaches, found a new coach, changed his swing because he wanted to get even better. Already had made 40 or 50 million. Not satisfied. He said, I can be better. And look what's happened since he came back. He has just won championship after championship, and I'm sure someday will be in history the best there ever was. Never satisfied. Wine is better than water. Let's go for the best. Famous story about a sea lion. It's a parable, I'm sure. A sea lion was out in the desert, had a little mud hole, a little bit of water, various animals, little oasis. And every once in a while, he didn't know how he got to this little mud hole. It's far from the sea. But every once in a while, he would climb up on a rock, and he would get a little sniff of the sea miles away. And that night, he would dream, and he and the other sea lions would be diving and swimming in all the ocean. And he would wake up in the morning and he would say, why am I here? Where is the sea? And he would talk to the other animals. And an old turtle said to him, that is the sea. And the sea lion just thought, no, this cannot be the sea. But he didn't know anything else, and so he accepted the mud hole as the sea. Well, the story goes that one night there was a storm. For 40 days and nights the wind blew, and he covered up his eyes to keep all the sand out of his eyes. When he woke up after the 40 days and the wind was over, every leaf of the tree was gone. There was no shade, no protection, and every drop of water in his mud hole was gone. And that night he dreamed of the sea and playing with the other sea lions and swimming and playing. The next morning he got up and he began to walk on his flippers. And the turtle says, where are you going? And the sea lion says, I am going to go to the sea. I'm going to find a sea. This cannot be what I was made for. You were made for God. You were made for heaven. You were made for this godly life. You were made. Water is turned to wine with Christ. Wine is better than water. You were made for something better. Don't be satisfied with water. When Christ can come into your life and change the water to wine, you were made for wine. You were made for a kingdom with God. Wine was a symbol in the Old Testament of the last days, the very best. And as a symbol, this can be now today. And finally, you have to invite Christ into your life. They tell the story about Billy Graham. Billy Graham was preaching in New York, struggling. Every morning he'd read 5 Psalms and 1 chapter from Proverbs and pray. He was doing meetings in New York, and they asked him to preach another month. He said, what will I preach? I've used all my sermons. And God helped him every morning, spending time with God, praying. God gave him more sermons, all by prayer. They invited him in 1982 to speak at a Today Show. And they had a little room set up for him where he could pray. And they said, Billy, Pastor Graham, you could pray here. He said, I don't need that little room. When I got up this morning, I prayed. In the limo to the studio, I prayed. During the interview, I prayed. I pray all the time. It is by prayer. It's by inviting Christ into your life. He will turn the water into wine. Well, finally, we have to say, we learn from this passage, that God is into celebrations. They had a wedding. God is into celebrations. God is into parties, and they drink wine to celebrate. And the question is today, as we finish this program, do you have anything to celebrate? What is God doing in your life? Are you alive? Has He changed the water into wine in your life? Are you living life at a level that you want to live, that you know God has called you to live? Or are you still living with the water? Are you waiting for God to somehow give you His best life in the future? Or as Joel Osteen says, can you live your best life today? Can you celebrate what God is doing in your life right now? My nephew has now been married a couple years. He emailed all of us. He was getting off the plane in LAX, and he says, I'm going to ask Leah to marry me that night. We loved Leah. And so about 40 of us, we all got in our cars and we drove to LAX, and we stood there waiting, and here they came, and sure enough, they'd been doing college in Spain, and he knelt down in front of her and he asked her to marry him. A couple years later, we had a big wedding in my church and at our university, and they're married. Celebration. Where are you now? Are you engaged to be married, or have you married Christ? And you are celebrated, and you know you're settled with Christ, and you're enjoying the best of marriage to Christ. May it be so. God bless you.